Hello, valued listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Paleoconnection. Today, we will be discussing India and libertarianism with our guest, Ajay, who is one of the heads of the Indian Libertarian discussion group, who I know will enlighten us with a lot of interesting information about libertarianism in India and a lot more, I'm sure. So, Ajay, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. I'm from India, obviously, and so I've been running the Indian Libertarian discussion group with a couple of my friends for a few years now. I mean, we've been active from 2013. So and I run a restaurant actually. I'm actually an amateur chef and a restaurateur as well. That's my main line of business. I actually do run a couple of restaurants and a bar. I have a background in software engineering as well. So yeah.
Wow, you're really a Renaissance man there. Just curious. What's your specialty in cooking?
I do Italian. I actually run an Italian restaurant. It's called the Flying Spaghetti Monsters. Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh, wow. Oh, that's really interesting. So, how did you originally get into libertarianism?
So I think it was a slow but gradual evolution. I've always been more of a classical liberal from my childhood. I was actually extremely pro-capitalist even growing up. So I don't really know how that happened, but I do know that a lot of my views, even as I was younger, were always more on the side of markets or capitalism. And slowly, I think I came across early in about 2000-ish. I heard about Ron Paul actually. So I just watched a few of his videos, and it sort of seemed to make sense, and a lot of things were what I agreed with. So I started reading more and more. I sort of used to also lean a little bit towards the left anarchist side in some areas like intellectual property, because I was a lot into open source, and Richard Stallman was obviously somebody that everybody used to look up to. So it was a little bit across the spectrum, but I had strong capitalist leanings, and after I started reading, then I came across the Mises Institute, and I started reading a lot more works. And of course, I read Ayn Rand when I was in school. And
that's really interesting. So I'm just kind of curious. Libertarian,
but then.
Oh, yeah. So I'm just really curious. Libertarianism, I've always associated more with, a very United States or Anglo-centric perspective. You really don't seem to me that many even, French or Italian or Swedish people who are libertarian, let alone people in Asia. So how is the libertarian scene in India? Is there a lot of people into it, or is it just starting to grow now?
I think it's just picking up in the last 4 to 5 years. So here's the funny thing. I've been a libertarian since, I think you can say pretty much a full-fledged libertarian from 2007-ish, I think. And because I remember I was rooting for Ron Paul back in 2008. but I sort of assumed that, that there would be no libertarians in India. It never even struck me that there could be other people. So I was just like minding my own business and sort of, I was more obviously, reading about American politics, and I was keeping more track of what was happening there. Because in my opinion, I thought like India was a gone case, like, there was absolutely no hope for redemption. Till I think it was about 2013 that I ran into a couple of other libertarians online, and I didn't even really know that they were libertarians, but on a lot of common posts. Obviously, their position on private property and individual liberty, and then one of them told me that there are a bunch of libertarians, and there was this group that was just starting up, called the Indian Libertarians Discussion Group. So I joined the group, and then I found a lot more people there. Then I started becoming active in the group, and then I became one of the admins there. And since then, we've been really pushing hard the whole libertarian philosophy. So a lot of I think back in 2013, there was just like a handful of people who were libertarian in those circles. But now I see quite a lot of people who are open to actually the ideas of free markets and capitalism. You see, India has a long history of socialism, and we had a central planned economy. So the whole private businesses are bad is sort of rooted in the Indian psyche. That's changing. That's good. The younger generation now is much more open to ideas of markets. I mean, it's still obviously not enough, but I think libertarianism is going to definitely keep growing in India. That is one thing that I'm pretty sure about, because Indians are more skeptical
Wow.
about the government than any other country, because we see it. It doesn't work. So it's horrible, and
Sure.
literally nobody says the government's a good thing. Yeah. So from there to libertarianism, it's a difficult leap, but I think there's potential. In the last few years, we've seen a lot of people who even started out as hardcore Marxists convert slowly towards the free market side on our group. So it's slow, it's a painful process, but I definitely think it's got future in India.
Sure. I'm just curious, is there an official libertarian party or any kind of libertarian groups that are even running politicians right now?
No. Okay. So there's no official libertarian party, and I think that's going to be very difficult in India anytime soon, because uh, the politics in India are not really issue based. They're mostly identity based, and libertarians are really not good with that sort of a thing. So uh, what gets you votes, and most of India is, obviously not very educated, or not, they don't really know. I mean, free market will never be an election point in India. I mean, it probably will be to attract a few urban voters, but most people in cities don't not even vote in the elections. It's usually so the poorer you are, the more involved you are in politics. In some countries, it's the other way around. It's like politics is usually the people who are rich and middle class and upper middle class who really go vote. But in India, it's the other way around. So if you're poor, you actually have more interest in the elections than somebody who's doing well off, because if you're well off, it really doesn't matter to you who wins. So people really don't care. We don't have a libertarian party, but we have one political party that's trying to do something. It's called the Swarna Bharat Party, which means Golden India Party, I guess. So they've been trying to push across few ideas of classical liberalism, but it's a fringe party. Like, probably wouldn't even get a couple hundred votes in the election of like millions. So, they've been trying. It's slightly a confused party. It's not as consistent as the Libertarian Party. So they have a lot of things muddled up. So yeah. So as far as the Libertarian Party is concerned, we don't have one in India, and I don't think we'll have one anytime soon. I personally don't think that political activism is a viable strategy in India in the near foreseeable future.
Okay, AJ, Brandon here. So you said that there's really no libertarian political party yet, But what about any influential like libertarian voices? Are there any like intellectuals that are popular, Indian intellectuals that are popular libertarians that people follow and are sort of like the leaders of the movement, even if they're not political leaders?
No, we don't. It's really hard for libertarian voices to find any space in the mainstream media. You have a few libertarian leaning people, a few economists who keep writing articles in online newspapers. But the few good podcasts run by there's one by Amit Verma. He's a classical libertarian. He's a minarchist libertarian sort of a thing. His podcast is pretty popular. But again, these are again popular within the classical liberal and libertarian segments. This is not something that is popular among the general masses. And you have, let's say, people like Shruti Rajgopal, who write articles about markets and which is published in the print and some of these other popular, online news magazines. But these don't really have like a really huge appeal. So you have libertarian points of view being put by different people, which are very, I think, industry specific. For example, there might be someone who's been following the financial industry for a long time and would make a case for a freer market in the financial segment or a freer market in the agricultural segment. But we don't have anybody who you could, we have a few, but they're not very popular. And getting mainstream media attention in India is quite a challenge. And unless it's a quick sound bite that sounds, very radical, or that sort of discussion doesn't really happen much in India. Most of the time, it's about blaming the other political party, or the usual politics that you see. Blame the other side, blame the other side. That's what usually gets most of the media space. A lot of people talk about the problems, but obviously the libertarian solutions don't really get much media airtime in India.
Okay, very interesting. What would you say about like regions within India? Obviously, India is a very big country. Would you say that there's a certain region or city that is a bit more libertarian minded? Like in your group, your libertarian group, is there a lot of people from a particular region or city, or is it sort of everyone's just spread out?
It is spread out to some extent, but see, most of the libertarians, you would find them from cities. And from what I've seen, there are a lot of libertarians that are clustered around Bangalore, for example. You would see a few of them in Bombay or Mumbai, as it's called now, and Bangalore. Bangalore, because a lot of Bangalore is it really took off with the whole IT sector, and so these are people who travel a bit and who work in a relatively deregulated industry. So they probably see the appeal of free market ideas than somebody who works in a legacy industry with So I think Bangalore might be a city where the number of libertarians might be slightly higher. Bombay and Bangalore. For the rest, I think they're pretty much scattered all around. You have a few in Delhi, but yeah, these are the major cities in India. I've seen very few libertarians in Calcutta, for example, or Kolkata, as it's called now. So that's on West Bengal, which was a very prominent communist hub and one of the last communist states till recently. So India's four major cities were like Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, and Chennai, and then Bangalore. These five are the major cities. So out of these, I think Bangalore probably has the highest amount of libertarians from my observation. Obviously, I can't back it up with data, but this is purely based on personal experience. And we've had a few meetups previously in Bangalore for libertarians, and we've always had a lot of interested people turn up at those events. So
that's very interesting. Also curious, somewhat related question. India, of course, is a country with a great deal of religious and cultural diversity. On a similar note, Is there any particular religion or ethnicity that perhaps is overrepresented in Indian libertarianism, or is it also just kind of spread out generally?
I think it's probably spread out generally. Yeah. So, I mean, Hinduism is the majority religion in India, and I don't think that there's any specific religious group that might be more libertarian. So there's a group called the Parsis, who are basically people who escaped from Iran like hundreds of years ago.
Oh, right,
And
right. They're Zoroastrians, right?
Yeah, Zoroastrians. Yeah, we call them Parsis. Yeah, so those people might. I mean, we've had a few discussions in the group, and some people think that Parsis might be leaning a little more towards free market as opposed to the rest of the general population. However, I'm not aware of any prominent Zoroastrian libertarians. I mean, there might be, but I'm not really aware of it. But because these people have always been strongly independent, and they couldn't really depend on anybody. It's not like they were a minority, but a very affluent minority, because they really worked hard and they had their own community networks, and they did really well. So, obviously they never got any support of the government. They believed in their community support. So probably they might have more libertarian inclinations is the hypothesis someone floated. Which sort of seems to make sense, but, I'm not really sure as to how much.
So, Brendan, you go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was going to ask AJ. So what effect does the legacy of the caste system have on current libertarian thought? Is it something that is very hard to overcome? Is it something that, because it existed, maybe is pushing more people in the direction of libertarianism? Basically, does it have any effect on, libertarian thinking today in India?
Okay, so I think one of the criticisms that libertarians actually get targeted as is that people say that libertarians are blind to historical injustices. So the caste system is without doubt like one of the most horrible institutions that has existed, and some people try to whitewash the impact of it, but it was and it still is a very horrible institution. So I mean, you could say it was akin to at a similar level of what slavery was in the U.S. This is a system that has existed for thousands of years. Now there are a lot of debates from a historical perspective as to how bad it was in the past, and a lot of people claim that the caste system actually became more solidified during the British rule, because the British were always trying to create policies based on caste by giving some groups preference, and trying to create a system, and yeah, so the caste system it's a very difficult issue even right now in India. Like we see crimes being committed against the people of, who are classified as lower caste all the time. So India is a country where there's no rule of the law. I mean, as a libertarian, it's like, I'm not saying that, I support the government interfering and everything, but what the government claims it does, which is to maintain law and order, it has absolutely failed. So if you go to most parts of India, the rural India, the caste system is very dominant there. And if you belong to a lower caste and you so much as look at somebody from an upper caste in the wrong way, you could get assaulted, beaten up, women are raped, and these people don't really have any recourse to justice, because if they go to a police station, which is again dominated by somebody from a more socially dominant caste, they're not even going to register the complaint, right? So, in fact, right now there's a huge controversy going on in India. There was a woman who was raped and murdered, and by four people of upper caste, and the police did not register her complaint. And they've been trying to. There are accusations that they fudged data. The police claim that she wasn't raped; she was just murdered. And the police even burnt the body of the victim
Wow.
against the wishes of the family. This that the family wanted to take the body back to the family hostage and burnt it right there. Like, so now there's no so these sort of horror stories are which make the media attention are just a very small fraction of what really happens in India. So it's absolutely I mean, you have to acknowledge that the caste system was a barbaric system. It had existed, it exists now, and there's a lot of disparate impact on the disadvantaged community. Now, this is something that nobody can deny, and anybody who's trying to deny that is, they're just being dishonest, or they're so jingoistic that they don't want to acknowledge the reality of what happens. Now, libertarians acknowledge this, and obviously, there are two aspects here. One is, every individual. I mean, if the government exists, it has to protect everybody equally. I mean, it can't only protect the upper caste people and, say, they're not going to protect the lower caste. I mean, this is not official policy because our constitution gives equal rights to everybody. But there's a difference between what the law says versus the reality of what happens on the ground. And so this is and the government has done tons of, laws. They keep passing one law after the other to try to help to correct these injustices. But the problem is when you don't really, when you don't understand human behavior, and you don't really think in a sort of a libertarian or classical liberal sense, you try to pass like 100 different rules, but you know that the rules are not really going to be implemented, right? So the government can say, the laws already exist, right? Killing, if you assault somebody, it's a crime. The law exists. But the problem is that, the lower caste people do not have access to justice because the police are too, they're too much into the caste system. Like they look out for the interests of the dominant community. And the politicians, if they're elected by the dominant community, they protect the police. So it's a vicious circle. And it's not easy to break that. So the criticism, okay, so what libertarians say is, there's a lot of criticism that they claim that libertarians are mostly represented from the upper caste, okay, which statistically that might be true, and I think that is true. It's the same accusation that in the US, everybody says, libertarians are mostly white people. And they're privileged white people, and that is true. A lot of libertarians are mostly white, and it's not that black libertarians or people of color or Asian libertarians don't exist. It's that it is largely it is largely a white. A lot of white people are involved in libertarian, and that's not because it is a tool of white supremacy. It is just so. It's just because of historical circumstances, and I can understand, like, see, if you're really poor and you depend on the government so much for everything, right, from your education to your food, then if a libertarian comes and say, the government should just stop giving you food, I mean, they're just not going to agree, right? So because the survival depends on it. So if they've been a historically discriminated class, they're not really going to see the merit, regardless of whatever argument libertarians might make about the market. The reality is, if the government does not give them some special treatment or does not give them some financial perk, their life is going to be difficult. And so it's this classic situation. Now the government has broken everybody's legs and gives them crutches. So if a libertarian comes and says the government should not give them a crutch, it doesn't really make sense.
That's a very good analysis.
Yeah, the government has destroyed the Indian government with like close to 5 decades of state planned, almost communist sort of a rule, destroyed the markets in India. So we were a poor country, and government policies gave us no chance for market forces to do what they could. And on top of that, see, you
So,
cannot sometimes. Yeah, sure.
so I have a question with that. Do you think the government also capitalizes off of identity groups and kind of uses that because they know that the more that say the BJP appeals to the Hindu identity, the more that they encourage identity politics, and in a sense, it kind of prevents them from having competition that is ideological, right? They don't have to worry about Indians or Hindus that are right wing or Indians or Hindus that are left wing. They only just play the Hindu card against the Muslims and against other groups. Is that kind of what you're seeing in Indian politics today?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Indian politics has always been largely identity based. In fact, there's a popular saying that in India, you don't cast your vote, you vote your caste. So, people just go and vote for the candidate based on their own social identity. So, for example, if you were a Dalit and, you would want to go and, you would want to vote for the Dalit candidate if you're an upper caste who belongs to a certain community. There's not like a 100% true rule, but largely India votes along the lines of caste. Caste politics are so fragmented that till a long time politicians used to pit one caste against the other. So I'll tell you a very interesting thing. So during the British rule, the British were the ones who first started the census, and then they started categorizing caste as upper caste and lower caste. So back then, all the castes wanted to be classified as upper caste because, there was a lot of stigma involved with being in the lower caste, and uh, so everybody wanted to be called an upper caste. So because if the British census classified somebody as an upper caste, they would have better social prestige. Now, look at what has happened 100 years now, where people in India fight for the right to be called as a lower caste. Because if you are classified as a lower caste, you get special privileges from the government. So it's just mind like how government policy can it's bad incentive. So now you a couple of years ago we had mass protests by one community in a northern state where they were saying we are a backward caste and we want special privileges, we want reservations, which is we have a quota system in India in colleges for admissions and in government jobs. So every group, every caste keeps fighting for these privileges. So a lot of groups keep wanting to call themselves as a backward caste just for these benefits. You can see the contrast between how it was in the British era, where nobody wanted to be associated as a lower caste, and they looked at the social mobility by classifying themselves as upper caste, and now everybody wants to be a backward caste just to get privileges from the government. So it's an interesting thing. And so your question about the Hindu vote, previously it was a lot of politics were divided along caste lines. So, you had to appeal to the lower caste in some regions or the scheduled caste and tribals in some region. Now, with the BJP's approach has been to divide it along the Hindu and Muslim lines. So that way, a lot of inter-caste politics sort of gets sidelined and it becomes as Hindu versus Muslim. And that strategy has worked really well for the BJP, and they won with a landslide majority in 2014. And after 5 years in 2019, they won with an even higher majority.
Okay. Yeah, AJ, what you said sounds a lot like sort of the race to the bottom that's happening sort of in
Yeah.
America right now. where certain identity groups are, you know, saying that other groups are privileged above them, and it's good to be at the bottom these days because then you have sort of the upper hand in conversation and in politics.
Yeah.
You're sort of beyond reproach, right? If everybody else has privilege and you don't, that sort of gives you an advantage, and it sounds a lot like what you're talking about with people wanting to be considered a lower caste so they can get more government privileges. I'd like to kind of shift gears a little bit into some current events, and I wanted to know what you thought about the current tensions between China and India in the Kashmir region.
Yeah. There's two different things here. One is the Kashmir issue and the China issue. Both of these are like totally.
Hello. Yeah, it seems you were breaking up there a little bit. You had just said that Kashmir and China are different issues, and then you had started breaking up. So do you think you could repeat that, please?
Yeah. So Kashmir and China are totally different. I'll talk a little bit about Kashmir first. After independence, Kashmir was an independent region which was ruled by a Hindu ruler, and the population was majority Muslim. Then the Maharaja acceded to India, but obviously the population was Muslim, so there was Pakistan was involved, which was trying to get that region into Pakistan. So they wanted a referendum to be held where the people would decide whether they would be in India or not. But Pakistan forces invaded the region before the referendum could be held and occupied large chunks, having a contentious issue with India claiming Kashmir as its own. And Pakistan obviously says, the people should decide referendum because they think that because Kashmir has a Muslim population, they would ally with Pakistan, which might be true, or they might actually want an autonomous region of their own. So it has been a mess there, and there is a lot of Islamic extremism in Kashmir. I think about 30 years ago, there was a huge exodus of all the Hindus from Kashmir because the militants started murdering them. So there was a sort of a ethnic genocide where the Kashmiri Pandits were attacked by the religious elements there, and then the army intensified their operations there, and there are a lot of atrocities being committed on the Kashmiris by the occupying military forces there. It's a very complicated issue. Kashmir is a problem which has no easy solution. So the Kashmir is, even though we call it Kashmir, till recently it was a pretty big state. There were three regions there. One is Ladakh, one is Jammu, and Kashmir. So Ladakh is mostly dominated by the Buddhists. I mean, there are a lot of Buddhist presence there. Kashmir is mostly Muslim majority, while Jammu has a significantly larger chunk of Hindus. So one of the things that the Narendra Modi government did was split Jammu and Kashmir into three parts. Where one was Kashmir, one is Ladakh, and one is Jammu. So even that was contested because the Indian Constitution did not technically give them the power. Kashmir was always a separate state, and they had some constitutional safeguards when they acceded that they would maintain their independence. So the laws that apply in the rest of India don't necessarily apply to Jammu and Kashmir. They had their own local legislature, which was which could decide the rules for them. So it was pretty autonomous in one sense, but obviously it's a mess now. So that's Kashmir, and then on the other side you have the China. China and India have had border issues from the time India was formed. Largely because and China offered a technology long, so I think but India refused that, and there were some regions that India was claiming, and China was really upset because India gave refuge to Dalai Lama. So that's a big bone of contention between India and China. So border skirmishes keep happening. We fought 2 wars with China, and India militarily was weak, and so we had, and obviously we lost the war. So it's So right now what's happening is fights over territory, the disputed region, and I don't think that it's going to escalate to a full-scale invasion or an assault. Even China during the last invasion, I think during the 61 war, they came into a lot of Indian territory, but they stopped exactly at their line where they claimed that the land belongs to China, and then they backed out after international pressure. They moved back. So I'm not really worried about the India-China conflict unless political parties want to escalate it for their own selfish motives and create an issue. But Kashmir is actually, I see Kashmir as a much bigger problem in the longer term because you have people there in Kashmir who are suffering under Indian occupation right now. So the China-India war over border is about largely uninhabited areas which have strategic advantage in a future war. But what's happening in Kashmir, I think, is more important because there are already people there who are suffering because of the way the Indian state has been treating them. And yeah.
So ultimately, Kashmir is the bigger issue than what's going on with China, is what you're saying.
And as personally, for me, as a libertarian, I see that it's a problem because I'm seeing a lot of human rights abuses happen in Kashmir. So I'm actually more worried about it than say the loss of some uninhabited land which has some strategic advantage in a future war. I think diplomacy is better to war whenever possible, and I think it would make much more sense for India to ally with a lot of other countries around China and create a strong deterrent than pick up these little wars over some amount of land. And sometimes I think it's okay even if you lose a little bit of land, if you can settle the border dispute. That would be a better strategy. It's obviously not going to have any political mileage because everybody's going to scream bloody murder at whoever does the deal where India loses even a little bit of land. But yeah, with the cost, we're paying a lot of money for defending. Yeah, so.
Right. I'm just a little bit curious because it seems like the Indian government might use this conflict over a small amount of land with China to try to put some kind of sanctions on Chinese products. We saw the thing with India, I think, completely banning TikTok and a whole variety of Chinese apps. And I'm just wondering, do you think the Indian government going forward is going to maybe even start a Cold War with China, or do you think this is all going to just blow over?
So I feel like these bans are pretty stupid and pointless. India is very much dependent on Chinese products. I mean, the whole world is. There's no two things about that. The world market is tightly integrated. India can ban all Chinese products. So I mean, these are just political moves to whip up crowd passionate, benefit a few crony companies which are probably making products in India. The government wants to. So what happens when Chinese products are banned? Indian consumers suffer because I mean I can understand. I mean it's not about the apps which are mostly entertainment apps. Like yes, TikTok's ban is wrong, but it's obviously not going to have that huge of an impact in general because other than the few influencers who depend on it on traffic and making some money. The main problem is when you have a lot of tariffs on everyday products, like maybe could be steel, could be your electronics that Indians buy, and India is a poor country, so you have to look. Is it really fair to force Indians to buy expensive products? it just to benefit a few companies, which are, and that this is actually the sort of crony capitalism that libertarians frown upon. So why should a poor guy in India, a poor guy who lives in a village, have to pay 50% more to buy a phone when he's already poor? It's absolute injustice. The government seems to be trying to use this strategy. I mean, it's a bit, see, I don't think that the government is, because I'm pretty sure they understand the economics of it. This is not rocket science. Everybody knows. There are a lot of vested interests within the country, like big industrialist groups, and who lobby for these sort of things. So the moment the government bans these products, there's going to be anything, one of these Indian corporations that are so cozy with the government that are going to launch their own competing products. And for them, it's an easier way to acquire customers. I mean, if the government bans TikTok and then, I start promoting my product at the same time, it's easy for me. I mean, this is a classic example of crony capitalism. And then I make money and then I start funding some of that, my profits into the political party that has done this. So this is this is typical Indian politics.
Sure. So international politics becomes the pretext for banning products, putting taxes on products, etc., etc.
Yeah, this is protectionism. This is cronyism and protectionism. If really China stopped applying India, I mean, if China decides to ban export of its goods to India, we would be crippled. I mean, India is like one of the largest producer of, medicine, right? So even now, all the vaccines for the coronavirus are going to be made in India. We're also the largest manufacturer of generics, and if even for the hydroxychloroquine, the US was dependent on India. And if we don't get the raw materials from China,
I'd like to shift gears for my final question. This is a question I always like to ask people from India. And the question is, what are your thoughts on the British colonial period? Do you view it with nuance, and do you see the positives and negatives, or maybe even a net positive for India, or do you take more of the hard line, more of the nationalist line that it was a terrible disgrace to India and it should have never happened?
Well, I think these sort of questions are always very difficult because we don't really know how the alternative situation would have been. See, what we know is that India was never, though India has a common shared cultural history across, vast chunks of its geography. If it had not been for the British, India would not have been one unified country. It would have been a lot of different provinces and a lot of different countries. Now, from a libertarian perspective, maybe I would say that would have actually been a better thing because India has so much diversity. It's like India is actually more like the European Union. If you look at it, there is more in common probably between a German and Italian than, say, a guy from the northeast part of India and a guy from South India. The cultures are different, people look different, languages are so different from each other. There's nothing in common. It just so happened that all these were put under a similar administration because of the way the whole British rule and the transfer of power happened. So some of I think there were a lot of negatives about the British rule. One is from a libertarian perspective, I think that the rulers of India, despite some of them were Islamic rulers, some of them were like local rulers, a lot of the law was actually not suddenly imposed upon people. So this was a gradual evolution of common law of the for years. A lot of problems that we see now. Even because of the few intervention, because these people do not the existing structures within India. So even under most rulers, the tribals actually, the tribal people in India actually had property rights on their forest. So it was only the British that came and started considering forests as their property. Even when the kings existed, the kings saw themselves as just mere conservators of forest. They did not claim the forest as their own. With British, it was just the other way around. They came and they decided all the forests belong to the crown, so we're going to start logging. And because the tribal people who have existed there for a long time were, being a problem, they classified those people as criminal tribes. Things that the British did, which totally destroyed the fabric of Indian, society, and it was an external shock, and it was very suddenly imposed on the population. So that is something which created a lot of unintended consequences. The rise of feudal landlords.
So, kind of final question before we go into the speed round. Now that technology is really proliferating everywhere around the world, and I'm sure you definitely see that in India, and as people are gaining better education, do you really think that we're going to see a young generation of people grow up who are more politically ideological and less identity based? And does libertarianism have a bright future in India, or do you think it's going to be significantly longer before we get to see an Indian Libertarian Party, really having a say in the Indian elections? What's your thoughts on that?
Before we see an Indian Libertarian Party, India, we're not there yet. I mean, you have to understand that what we see online is just a small chunk of the Indian population. Most of India lives in pretty much a lot of poverty, and the political system is too dominated by caste and special interest groups of various kinds. So it's going to be a slow, long process. I don't see anything happening very quickly. So it is frustrating even for us as we are doing our bit to spread these ideas. But I don't see any radical, drastic change maybe like what happened in Brazil. I don't see something like that happening in India so fast. The libertarian movement is actually pretty popular in Brazil, and they had a role in the election of Bolsonaro, who is a right-wing thing, but libertarians sort of made a coalition with him for political convenience, I guess. I'll not comment on the motives, but I'm just talking about the influence of libertarians within Brazil. But in India, I think we are not going to see something like that happen anytime soon. We're obviously doing our bit to spread the ideas of liberty, but
right.
I'm not, so I'll be a little bit realistic here.
Sure, but definitely best of luck in that endeavor, because it would be great to see India, take a different route at this point than following the sort of failed models you see in a lot of other countries where multi-ethnic societies just get pushed into total chaos by the competing identities there. But yes, so thank you very much with that. And I think we're going to go right into the blitz round of questions, if that's okay with you, Ajay.
That's all right.
Excellent. Do you want to start us off then with the first question, Brandon, and then we can just alternate?
Yeah, sure. So AJ, just keep your answers short, as this is the blitz round. First question, what are your thoughts on Winston Churchill?
Bad guy.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you want to go just explain a little bit on that for us? Just keep it to, 20 seconds or something.
Yeah, I think he had a large role to play in the starvation of people in Bengal, and that's something that a lot of Indians have a problem with. He was, his attitude towards Indians was well known, and British policy led to the starvation of millions of people in West Bengal during the famines, which were largely caused due to British interference. So I think, he was a pretty bad guy from the Indian perspective.
Sure. So this is going to seem like a very trivial shift in questions, but it is the blitz round. Hollywood or Bollywood?
Hollywood. Bollywood makes mostly rubbish movies. Yeah, I don't even watch them. So yeah.
Okay. Next question. So what do you think the biggest thing holding India back from becoming like a legitimate world power?
uh, socialism and total capture of educational institutes and media by left-leaning communist, Marxist uh, circles, which dominate the debate mostly. So yeah, till we can break, till we can break free of that, I don't see progress happening. We need more economic right-wing ideas spreading.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, we see the U.S. sort of heading in that same direction with the cultural Marxist influence in the media and, in Hollywood and so on and so forth. Go ahead, Verv.
So this became surprisingly a topical question when we found out that you are a chef. So what is the best Indian curry?
Okay, that's God, I can't think of one. Okay. Okay. I can't answer that question really honestly now because my mind's just blank. What's the best curry? I can't because okay. So here's the thing. Like, so it's like saying which is the best European dish. Like, there's so many regions and it's so hard to pick.
I see. Okay, very interesting.
Okay, next question. True or false? The partitioning of British India into 3 nations, including India, West Pakistan, and East Pakistan, was a mistake.
No, definitely not a mistake. Well, the British did not partition into 3 countries. They partitioned into 2, and India broke apart Pakistan into 2 parts to, obviously defend the rights of people in Bangladesh who were being massacred by the Pakistani army. But I believe that the division of India was right, even though it was done in a very bad way, which led to so many people dying and being massacred. The way it was done was wrong, but more regions, more provinces is a good thing. And in fact, I would blame the British for probably not splitting India into enough different provinces, maybe.
Okay, good answer.
That is that's a very amazing answer. I would not have necessarily expected. So, who is the Indian that foreigners don't know about that they really should know about?
So I would say we had a sort of a classical liberal party post-independence, led by this man called Rajgopalachari, and we had people like Minu Masani and B.R. Shenoy, an economist, who were few voices of reason in post-independence India. I think these people just associate India totally with socialism and communism after independence, but there were a few voices. They were ignored, unfortunately, but I think maybe a little bit more spotlight on them would change the way people perceive the development of Indian economic thought post-independence. So I think those people would be, I can't say one people, but among those people, I think Rajgopalachari, Minu Masani, and B.R. Shenoy, the economist, who are people that, people should know about.
Excellent.
Okay, this is my last speed round question, and it's sort of a traditional Paleoconnection speed round question that we ask everyone. So, what are your thoughts on Adolf Hitler?
Oh, horrible. I mean, probably the most, absolute. He was a tyrant and he was a horrible person. So, yeah, I can't think there would be anything else to say about him. Like, the one, absolutely.
That's
genocidal dictator.
That's very satisfactory, as we've had a remarkable amount of guests trip over that question somehow. But thank you.
I can't believe that, but yeah. So I can't think that anybody would say that Hitler was. If there's anything redeeming to Hitler.
Well, that's all very excellent. I think that will close off our Blitz round. So we just want to thank you again for coming on. And I hope we definitely have you back again in the not so distant future.
Definitely would love that. Thank you, Jacob and Brandon, for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to AJ, and we'll see you all again next time on the Paleo Connection.